fifth grade. Really ain't no difference if that nigga gay.
Blood satellite.
That's where I've landed now. Like I had a big fight with my buddy here who's Latvian on, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday, when they were first pulling people out of the embassies, and they said right before the invasion. And I was saying, my heart goes out to the people in Donbass, and I get it that if the people in Donbass aren't happy and they want to have their homes, and Russia's going to come and defend them, I'd be on Russia's side if Russia's going to send troops into Donbass to push the Ukrainians out of Donbass and support the independence of those two republics. And then what we got was a full-scale invasion in Ukraine. And as of now, as we're recording, the Russians have encircled Kiev and are bombarding the city. So, I mean, yeah, it sucks. There's a lot of. I'm saying it sucks. I'm not finishing my thought. I'm saying it sucks because so many people, white people, Europeans nominally, are going to die for no fucking reason, for no reason. And both sides are backed by, small hats or whatever you want to call them. And it just, at the end of the day, as much as it sucks that so many people, white people, Europeans on the ground are going to die, like you said, I still am a little bit of a happening / acceleration enjoyer. I still can't help but smirk and laugh a little bit at the entire world burning, because I kind of just have been waiting for that. I don't know. And I can't really justify that right now.
Also, if you are a happening enjoyer and an accelerationist, you're in a permanent state of blue balls, because whatever happens isn't as big as you wish it would. It's not actually happening. It's little tiny happenings, but I'm thinking, okay, now this is happening. So when do the UFOs land? UFOs have to land now.
I don't know, man. I think the cork is off. I don't know. I think this is something. This is maybe one of the things to talk about that I haven't seen a whole lot of. I see people talking about it as if they know, but I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. But I kind of feel right now like the cork has come off of that bottle. Like somebody was saying the other night that, the 24th will be remembered as the night that Westphalian Order died. And I think that's possible. People talking about ships in the Taiwan Strait now. Like maybe this is actually where it goes from here. Maybe this isn't just because I remember Maidan, like when that fucking that bitch Carol Baskin, no, that bitch Madeleine Albright, went in and tried to assassinate, who was it, Poroshenko or whoever? I fucking forget. But the point is like all of this shit was caused by NATO and the US in the first place. I remember that happening, and as that was happening, people were like, "Oh, this could be war. This violates Minsk. This does all kinds of things." No, nothing happened. But like this right now, I mean, this could maybe be global war. I don't want a global war, but I mean, I'll take it. I don't know.
I like the idea of, seeing these fucking bitches as their own political force globally. Just like the Marxists, it's the third international conference.
Oh man, there would be.
It's just Madeleine Albright and what's her dick? Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher. But that is funny. It's like you'd mentioned that if anyone's curious about what a lot of the debate going on in right channels right now is, which side is more Jewish than the other.
Yeah.
And once again, I've taken the enlightened third position take that everyone is Jewish except for me.
It's very safe.
According to my sources, the bugs I planted in the thought leaders' offices is that both sides are Jewish puppets. And that's just where we stand, because they both make good points. Yeah. That's actually, if you look at, here's what Putin said. Putin is anti-European, anti-white, but America. But actually Ukraine is secretly, we are just watching a 3-way Israeli war. Moving on.
Yes.
Moving on to the next thing.
I think like it's such a meme, it's so funny to talk about it that way. But actually that is kind of what I think. And I didn't even think that a week ago. I was kind of a little bit more pro-Russian, but now that I'm seeing a lot of stuff, I'm like, no, you know what? It doesn't. I mean, I'm not even being consistent with my own politics by thinking that Russia is doing anything right here. Putin is playing his own game. He's got his own motivations, and Putin's forces are not going to be giving any leeway to the local people in Kiev who have taken up arms in a nationalist way to defend their city, to defend their country. They're all going to get fucking shot. They're all going to die. So you can't say Putin's a good guy. And then we know, I mean, you can't at any moment say that Ukraine is good, because Ukraine is obviously backed by NATO and the US.
Well, it's funny. The story that was emerging this morning, and I don't know if this is confirmed or not, but they said that a lot of the fighting in Kiev was due to infighting amongst the militias.
I heard about
a lot
that,
of the
yeah.
gunfire. And then I looked at that and say, they are our guys.
Yeah.
They get it. They are fucking right-wing nationalists because they're shooting each other.
Yeah. Cherry was like belly laughing about that this morning. Like, what did you think was going to happen? You get like a case of 10,000 AK-47s and you hand them out to random people. Of course, you immediately have like drunken shootouts in the bar parking lot and shit. Like, what did you think would happen?
If you give the entire dissident right now, give each and every one of them an AK-47 and say, do your revolution, they will all be dead within a day.
Yes, it's the quickest way to liberalize society, is to give the alt-right guns. Yeah.
They're just going to be sniping each other. But you had said something that was interesting about, and this is something that I say, and people will think that this is a fence-sitting position or a centrist take, but it is. I think it's grounded in reality, and I'm not saying that I won't do this, but it was, our inability to predict things. So if you follow a lot of the thought leaders, not everyone, but a lot of the thought leaders on the right, in the various denominations of the dissident right, they've pretty much been wrong about everything. Because I remember even leading up to this, like, Russia's not going to invade. This is a flex. America's flexing. Russia's flexing. They're not going to do anything because of Nord Stream. They're not going to do anything because of business. This was a common refrain. And going back throughout time, we've been very bad at calling things. And so, famously, a lot of these people were very bad at calling COVID.
Yeah.
Calling what was going to happen from COVID. And no one was able to call. Here's one thing that no one predicted and everyone seemed to think wouldn't happen, is that, first of all, Justin Trudeau and the Canadian government install emergency measures to crack down on protesters, and that even when lifting those same emergency measures, which Justin Trudeau just recently did, all of the bank stuff would stay in place. So we not only failed to predict the bank stuff, that people will get their accounts frozen, but once the emergency has been lifted, all that bank stuff, those rules and regulations will remain.
If someone has their account frozen for what they did at any time throughout these illegal protests from February 15th to this day today, once this is revoked, you're saying that any charge, that no one can have their account frozen now, and whoever's had their account frozen now will expect it immediately to be unfrozen. It is no longer legal to freeze the accounts. Is that actually the status now?
What I'm saying is that in accordance with our principles of operational independence, police will take those decisions. The financial institutions that are responsible for implementing the Emergencies Act provisions will take those decisions. And certainly there are reports around unfreezing, but those are all decisions which are being undertaken by law enforcement.
So, and if you are Canadian, you are living in a reality where you can have your crypto wallet seized by the government. No one predicted that, right? So my thing is, stop predicting. Now that sounds defeatist. Okay, but let me qualify that in a second. We're bad at it. We're not good at predicting. We make calls, they're always fucking wrong, and then we cope afterwards. So my thing is, just don't do it. But to build on that, and we're going to talk about this later on, but this book called The Black Swan by Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who's a known guy. He's an interesting guy. A lot of people like him. A lot of people liked him because he was against Jordan Peterson for a while, back when Jordan Peterson was, but he was a big shit talker, that guy. But if you actually read his books, they're very interesting. And so we'll get into this later, but his take in this book in the beginning was about how history is written by these things called black swan events. So things that are of critical importance that change the world that are usually unpredictable. A good example might be, after World War I, the least predictable thing in the world was World War II, like right after. No one would have said, oh, there's going to be World War II. In fact, if you go through the academics, go through the press, go through everything, they were trying to cope and say, oh, this is World War II is not going to happen. And then it did happen.
Takeaway number 1, the black swan problem. For an event to qualify as a black swan, it must fulfill the following 3. 1. It's an outlier. Nothing that has happened before can convincingly point to even the possibility of the event. 2. It carries an extreme impact. 3. It becomes explainable only after the fact. Human nature fools us into believing that we should have been able to know it would happen all along.
The point being that we are very bad at predicting, and he breaks down the reasons why. And again, we'll cover this later. But one point that he said was, we as groups who like to predict things, who see value in predicting what's going to happen, we actually don't make our predictions in a paradigm where we account for these black swan events, meaning that we actually will deny up and down that we live in a world that something unpredictable can happen. So his point was, our job isn't to try and predict everything that would happen before we actually admit to ourselves that we are in a world where unpredictable things will happen and that we cannot predict them. And we need to plan for living in a world where unpredictable things happen. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
It's kind of like a meta-analysis, but
Yeah.
we need to operate in a world where we actually, knowing we can't predict everything, but what systems and processes do we have in place to account for that? And so
You need the political equivalent of a savings fund or a rainy day fund or something like that, right?
Yeah. So for me, predicting what's going to happen in Ukraine, anything that matters, anything that is historically or globally significant will not be able to be predicted. Now, he gives the example, I'll push back a bit on this, because he gave the example of 9/11 in the book. He said, who could have predicted 9/11? Well, evidence shows that there was chatter about something like that Al-Qaeda was planning an attack, that the Taliban were involved, and George Bush famously ignored it. Now, I don't want to get into a 9/11 thing, but we could push back on his statement there with that actually, the data is there, it's just our inability to gather this data and construct it into an actual real world scenario. Anyway, so when it comes to Ukraine, my stance is that you have to look at it from a few different perspectives. Now, I am breaking the exact rule I just laid out. Oh shit! I'm taking off my third positionist cap and I put it on my podcaster toque. And I'm going to give my outline of everything you need to know about Ukraine.
Today, we celebrate our Independence Day.
This is operating in the world where everything is Israel. Okay. So, from just, because people want to fit this into like a good guy, bad guy sort of, story and that's what the liberals, that's what Americans want to do. That's what, the West wants to do. That how much is Putin like Hitler? And then, the conservatives playing their rules like, nah, he's actually like Stalin. And you say, wow, good point. Thank you, conservatives. Where it's just, no, but actually it's really the communists. Okay. Yeah. This reminds you of communists. We get it. Thank you very much, Lindsey Graham. Thank you, Aaron O'Toole, whoever the fuck still calls themselves a conservative. Okay. But there is from a strictly geopolitical point, I think Russia has a case to be made that the expansion of NATO influence over the 20th century, breaking many assurances that NATO would not expand and bring European countries into the American sphere of influence right up to their doorstep, that is significant. Okay, I hear you. I hear Russia has a claim to be made that this is a reaction to American imperialism through soft means, through color revolutions, through NGOs, through funding, whatever, and they're pushing back. Okay, I get that. I also understand that when we covered the history of Ukraine, Ukraine is a very complicated nation. And this is where I don't believe in a universal morality in this. So for me, when they say we have a conflict between Ukrainian nationalists who want to have this idea of Ukrainian people was not birthed by an NGO, was not birthed by some liberal conspiracy. This nationalist movement does come from Ukraine. However, Ukraine is divided almost 50-50 on whether or not they want to be this entity called Ukraine, or if they see themselves as just either a Russian satellite state or just an extension of Russia itself. So even within Ukraine, there is that negotiation happening. And we pointed out that even the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is kind of a compromise between these two things. Okay. And the history of this goes back hundreds, it goes back centuries. Okay. So, and in that battle, I don't see a morality. So when people ask me, are you on the side of the Ukrainian nationalists? Or are you on the side of the ones who see themselves as ethnic Russians? Like, I don't care. I'm looking for the data. I'm just looking like it doesn't really impact me, the self-determination of these people. Just like the Aboriginals in Canada, if you want a Canadian example, it doesn't actually impact me whether or not the Aboriginals maintain their culture. If they do, I will behave in a world where that happens. But if they were to just disappear or become amalgamated or assimilated into, I don't know, the Chinese, I'm like, I don't care. I don't think that's morally right or wrong. That's just an occurrence.
Yeah, it's not your problem. You're not one of them. It's their concern because it's a nationalist concern.
And also, I don't think it's a moral question. I guess that's what I'm trying to get back to. Is like, who do you morally defend? I'm like, well, we will see if the Ukrainians can centralize their power and make a play. And you could argue that the Ukrainian nation has expanded over the course of a few centuries, especially during the 20th century, taken different parts, and maybe those are under contention and maybe those, whatever. But, so maybe the Ukrainian nation, Ukrainian people ends up being smaller. Okay, whatever. But I don't have a moral tie to that necessarily. And I want to prevent them from being destroyed. I think that would be bad. I think you should protect their existence. However, what we are seeing is a debate of whether or not they even want to exist. And you kind of see that with white people too. You kind of see that in America. You see that in Canada. I don't expect China to actually care about white people are fighting for self-determination. That's kind of what we're doing right now. We're trying to fight for that. These descendants of Europeans exist and they have a culture and they should exist. I don't expect Russia to even really give a shit about that. And that's something that we have to sort out. That's our fight. Our fight is to basically prove to other white people that we should exist. That's very, very difficult. But that's that's our thing. I don't fucking care. We can, and if we can get funding or other people involved for that, whatever. But that's not necessarily moral. That's just Darwinian. And you can argue, people can say it should be moral. I know, but you're not gonna make that case to people. And so from a geopolitical standpoint, that's where I stand. And from a identity-based standpoint, that's where I stand. However, the thing that I want to make clear, and this is something we've discussed many, many times over the years, is that I'm not really pro-Russia, just like I'm not pro-China. Even if I am anti some of the things the West does, I am not under the illusion that Russia or China or Iran or really any other country would be friendlier to people like us. And I think you agree with that, but I really want to clarify that I don't subscribe to based China. I don't subscribe to based Russia. I don't subscribe to based Iran. Like, they're the good guys. And that if the American empire fell and Russia ruled the world, that Russia would be way better and cooler because they seem to be more friendly to our way of looking at things. I don't believe that. Sorry, continue.
It's a little bit ironic because to even make that leap is a very, very liberal thing. To kind of phone out your ideology and your principles to something that's completely alien and say, well, this totally alien thing, maybe this is the thing that's actually better for me than my own family. Like, no, look, your family, your tribe, your nation has a problem. You hate them. You're mad at them. Okay, I get it. We're all there with you. But China is not going to fix it. China is a fucking space alien, and so is Russia. And Russia a little bit less so. You might actually, you actually are Ukrainian, so for you personally could arguably make more of a case for this if you wanted to take a side. But I can't. My family is Welsh, French, and Scottish. So we're Western and liberal throughout. If I hate that, I need to resolve it from within. I should never go looking for solace from the fucking Chinese. Yeah, it's
so
crazy.
The way in a paradigm where Russia, for some reason, let's just thought experiment, Russia took control and then they were surveying their vanquished opponent and they see people like us like we were on your side the whole time, they would look at us the same way we look at Afghan interpreters in Afghanistan and the Afghan war. Like, we helped you the entire time. At the end of the day, you're like, yeah, well, just go away. Well, maybe we'll give you some. They still see you as an alien. And I mean that. I mean, not extraterrestrial, but an alien idea. Like, Russia historically has been anti-Western.
Yeah.
And there's a very strong case we made that there's historical reasons for that, but they are to their core anti-Western. This goes back centuries. So to act like they would not be hostile to all levels of Westerners, to me, is a big leap. It's a big wish. And I don't think there's a big enough fucking genie to grant that wish in the world. So, like, even if, you like them, they're still going to treat you like a fucking shitty colonial Westerner, whatever Russians say, whatever Chinese say. The Chinese probably don't. They might like, in abstract, Europeans more than black people, but they don't see you as one of them. So you'll be so would you be better here? And they'll say, oh, well, America attacks us every day. America is hostile towards us. I'm like, you haven't seen hostility yet. And I'm no fan of the way we are treated and our people are treated in the West, in Canada, in America, in Europe, and the mass immigration and the crackdowns. I'm like, but I'm not banking on these other opponents being nicer. I'm thinking they'll just straight up shoot us, because as you can see, like Russia, Putin, and you could say this is propaganda, whatever, but he has not been friendly to a lot of the far right people. He has not been friendly to a lot of the nationalists in his country. And we could break that down and why that is, but it's really the idea that they would be friendly to a lot of our beliefs. First of all, there's that. Second of all, and this is something people will disagree with me on, I'm sure, but I really believe this, I am not convinced that Russia, China, Iran, whoever, actually have the ability and the power to withstand the pause or the degeneracy or the globo homo or whatever you want to call it. Now, they will say that America is the primary exporter of trans stuff, gay stuff, liberalism, all the stuff we don't like. They'll say America is the force projector that casts that across the world. I don't really agree with that. I think they're part of it. I think if America disappears tomorrow, you still have the World Economic Forum, you still have the UN, you still have all the NGOs that are not actually run by America. They're run by, Israel, one of them. Like, a lot of the mass migration groups are not run by Americans. So, like, if the American empire falls, I actually don't think the force projection of all this liberalist degeneracy will stop. I don't see that. Furthermore, I don't see anything really intrinsic in any of these cultures that make them able to withstand it. By that, I mean, I think we can also find a lot of cases and a lot of news stories and a lot of studies that show that gay acceptance is on the rise in China and Russia, that Russia and China are permitting a lot more degeneracy. And that's not because of American trickery. It's because of something else. It might be the NGOs, it might be a decentralized force, but I actually don't think Chinese culture is as strong as we want to think it is. I actually don't think Russian culture is as strong as we think it is. I just think there hasn't been as much pressure applied to it. And I think you could see similar social deracination, whatever you want to call it, in these countries if the right pressure was applied. So I don't actually think there's something fundamentally that makes them more able to withstand the things we hate about the West, even if the West wasn't there. And we can talk about the culprits all we want about what forces are doing, but just the idea that they are on our side and are good guys and they've cracked some deeper civilizational code that makes them able to withstand this. I don't think so. I think they'll fall the same way America fell.
Yeah.
And whatever. And that's just my feeling. So I don't put a lot of stock in these people being our friends. So again, when it comes to a moral thing, like, oh, you have to pick a side, I'm like, I can only pick a side from a geopolitical reaction standpoint, where I guess Russia has a point to push up against NATO and to make a show of force.
The reason that I testified, along with a number of other people, many of them had been influential in bringing the Cold War to the end. The reason I testified against expanding NATO expansion, against expanding NATO in the beginning in the late 90s was because we had, at the end of the Cold War, we had removed the Iron Curtain. We had created what we had aimed for, a Europe whole and free. And it was obvious if you start piecemeal expanding NATO, you are going to, without including Russia, you are going to once again precipitate a buildup of arms and a competition, an armed competition.
Okay, but when you're talking to me about identity-based stuff, I don't see it. When we talk about like who's actually the deeper, more ideologically aligned people, I don't see it. I don't have faith in China liking us or even really operating at our level of what the actual problem is. I don't see it. So that's just what I would say to people. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I agree. It's like we're under the knife already of those forces, right? So you can't look at them and say like, oh look, no, they're pure. They don't have these problems. Yeah, they don't have these problems because they're not the target. You could even make the argument that the reason that we're the target is because we're the pure ones, not them. You know what I mean? Like we were the healthiest host, and that's the reason that we have been co-opted. And the minute they're done eating our carcass from the inside out, they're going to go after them. You know, like if this really is the end of our order, and I think 100 years from now you'll be living in a much worse world, and China will be the new, paused tranny empire because they've gone in that direction because they need a new host because they're parasites. So when you're dealing with a parasitic problem, that's the way you need to view it. You're not saying like, well, over there it's clean. Like, no, by going there you make it unclean because you brought the parasites with you. You need to fight the parasites. That doesn't mean you need to. The problem isn't you. The problem is the parasite.
Yeah, when it comes to China, they say, well, at least China doesn't have child drag shows for now. But the thing is, like, okay, let's. What is China? Are the Chinese people smarter than us? No. Are they stronger than us? No. Are they more organized? Actually, no. If you want to look at it, like the way China exists and the way Japan exists, actually is. This is where we get into spiritual stuff, but the idea that we have this concept called guilt, that we behave a certain way even when no one's looking because we have this thing called guilt. And you could say that's because we think God's watching, whatever. But even if you're an atheist, you have this idea that you need to be consistent in your behavior. Whereas in China, they don't. In China, they behave like pieces of shit unless they think they're being watched. It's all a show. So in terms of even social cohesion, in terms of deep connection of roots of the people, that's not even there. So I don't even accept the idea that they're more organized or more collectivist. I think that's a show too. So you have to ask, so if we're more experienced and tougher and stronger, and they're weak almost every single way, and they don't value life as much. They like, how many fucking Live Leak videos do we need to see? Like they don't value the lives of each other as much as we do. So like, what about them as a civilization or a people do you think is able to withstand the same things that we withstood? Or is it just that they haven't gotten the chance yet? Or it's just that they just have a tenuous iron grip on the internet for a bit? You see what I'm saying? So like, if you're asking me to pick a side, like I guess, but with the understanding that this is I'm picking the side in a sports game. It's like when I'm watching a game and I'm watching a team and I'm kind of cheering for a logo. I know that everyone on that team, an NBA team, none of these people are from my city. None of these people live here. None of these people even like me. None of these people look like me. But I'm kind of, and the teams, the logos change over time. So I'm just saluting a marketing campaign. So I'm like, if you're asking me which thing, I guess, which dumb gay propaganda thing, okay, I guess Russia has a point. Other than that, the deeper you drill into this, the less substance it has. So that's just kind of where I stand anyway.
Yeah.
But
hey,
I like, and then outside of that, the enlightened third position is just being a happening enjoyer who never actually enjoys anything.
Yeah. Because it never really happens. Yeah, it's like blue balls is the best way to describe it, really.
I'm just trying to put a Christmas tree up in purgatory. That's all I can do. Like on the topic of propaganda, which is really what people are talking about. So that's the core of the issue. That's if I'm looking at the very big moving parts, that's where I stand. But that's why I'm not interested in the human interest stories. So if people are showing videos, like we laugh at the video of the Ukrainians just shooting each other because it's like that's funny. But also there's another story of, I think I saw it this morning. It was like, here's a photo of a young Ukrainian couple who are going to go fight the war. And here's a photo of them getting married just before they went out. And here they are holding two AK-47s. And that's like, see, that's all just propaganda, whether or not it's true or not. But I don't even have interest in that stuff. So if you're telling me a story, if you're trying to give me a Syrian girl, remember Syrian girl? There was this famous account, a Twitter account, that was supposed to be, and looking back on it now, it just seems so fake. But I remember everyone liking this fucking thing. It was Syrian, this little toddler, I think it was, like some very young girl who was in Syria and was tweeting.
In July of last year, when President Assad blocked deliveries of food into East Aleppo, the possibility of starvation became more threatening than bombs. The Alabed family survived on rice and macaroni.
I was there sick, and my dad go outside to find to me a medicine. Because there is no medicine, no hospitals, I was too sick. I am Bana.
When Bana's school was bombed, her mom says Bana came up with the idea to post a video online.
First thing I said to Mom, why the people didn't know about us.
So she wanted to post in Facebook, but I said no, Twitter is more strong or more powerful.
Whenever you see a little girl getting famous, you should be suspicious, first of all. Greta Thunberg it's all just different levels of Anne Frank.
Yeah.
They're all Anne Franks, which means it's a damning, weirdly sexualized construct just to attack people like us. And the only thing we say is, I don't want to partake in this. And that is just evidence of us being corrupt. But why are you doing this? That's all we say. That's all we say to these girls who are brought in front of us. They say, what do you think about that, Trump man? And the only thing I ever see brought up in these comment sections is, why are you doing this? Everyone knows this is a farce. And they say, oh, so I guess you want little girls to die. And then we say, I repeat, why are you doing this? That's all that's happening. But anyway, so with this conflict, be on the lookout for little girls who show up with harrowing stories that seem to be like, oh, like I'm seeing this like you're shopping a script around. Like you're I'm an executive, and you're saying, what about this story? And I say, to the waste bin with you and your family for 3 generations. I show you the door, and beyond that door, guess what's there? It's a gas chamber.
It's an oven. Yeah, of course.
It's another. I go through another door. I try and leave the room. You go in the gas chamber. You see it, and I say, "Fine, you've defeated my ruse. Get out." And then you go through the second door, and what's through that door?
The gift shop.
It's another gas chamber.
It's another gas chamber. Yes, the real gas chamber. Yeah. Fuck.
Every door in this house leads to a gas chamber. I just built it around myself.
A labyrinth of gas chambers.
Don't trust little girls in my house of gas.
It's also interesting that there's a timer on this kind of stuff. Like, you're not going to see it. I guess if it was a humanitarian tragedy, you'd think that a lot of that tragedy would happen right out of the gate, and you'd hear about it. And it's been 2-3 days, and we're starting to get some of the propagandistic shit, like the young couple getting married. But we haven't seen the kids yet. And I don't think that's because kids haven't been harmed. I think realistically, probably a lot of kids are dead already. There's probably a lot of dead Ukrainian kids, I would imagine, by now. But they're not gonna start phoning them in until they have time to get their sound stages set up because they're not there yet. This happened pretty rapidly. So
all the kids are died because they got vaccines.
Well, I mean, and I think that's another way to identify this shit. Like when they're tying it back in, if they're tying it back into the health crisis or to whatever else, making it about Nord Stream or whatever, then you know that it's, I don't know. Who knows?
I don't want to hear about Nord Stream. What I want to hear about is Nordstrom Rack.
What the fuck?
I don't know. Fuck! Fuck! No, but speaking of the propaganda, like I read a book recently. It's a famous book. It's well known. It's called Manufacturing Consent.
Oh, yeah.
By Noam Chomsky.
In 1988, Noam Chomsky co-authored a book with Edward Herman called Manufacturing Consent. It blasted apart the notion that media acts as a check on political power, that media inform the public, serve the public, so that we can better engage in the political process.
And this is, I think, like the 5th edition, something crazy like that. It's still brought up. It's still touted as one of the greatest books produced by an American mind. And I've seen a lot of interviews with him lately. He's doing a tour recently, and this man looks like he's on death's door.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know why he's doing this. I don't know who is allowing this.
He's looked like that for 20 years, though.
I can't find a video of Noam Chomsky where he doesn't look 70.
Yeah.
Like already. Like I'm looking at a video from like the 80s. He's already like a 65-year-old man. And now it's ghoulish.
Yeah.
And he's just got a big beard, just a big fuck you beard. And he's like looking and he's just peering off into space like some kind of, what's a Lord of the Rings? Not an orc, but some kind of higher Morgothian general. Anyway.
Like a gnome. That's a fantasy creature. He's a gnome. You get nothing.
Yeah, just staring at it. And like he's got like my grandfather before he passed, he's like, you ask him a question and it takes 5 minutes and there's all these extra pauses. And then he's speaking very low. Everything sounds like a death rattle. And I think it is ghastly.
Yeah.
Noam Chomsky being allowed on Zoom says more about our society than child drag shows. Let's just say that. But I just gave this book a shot, and I never read it before. I got a pretty good deal on it, Manufacturing Consent, and it really gave me insight into how he sees things. We joked earlier about how if we had to summarize the mainstream political leanings of Canadians, it would be Anarcho-Shitlib.
Yes.
Just a shitty liberal, but with a germ of anarchism in there. And for someone like Noam Chomsky, and like he is a very academically successful man, and he is very intelligent. I'm not calling him dumb. I'm not calling him an idiot or anything, because I think his work on linguistics, this is what everyone says. I'm saying what everyone says, but I'm going to say it anyway. Yeah, his work on linguistics is great. I actually don't know that for sure. I've never looked into it. But it's a thing people say, and I'm sure it's good, whatever. But what he's famous for is his media analysis. What he's famous for is his geopolitical predictions. Here's what always targeted at America. But I read this. This is very much a media analysis book. And his worldview is leftist, and he would call himself a leftist. I think a lot of people would, and he's appearing on actual like Marxist shows and podcasts these days. We could probably get Noam Chomsky on here. I think if we stop saying slurs, I think we're just autistic enough for us to pass as like an anti-capitalism podcast. And
yeah,
especially since the left is appropriating the right's obsession with like fucking vaporwave, fucking pink neon bullshit. Like if we swap that in, we could be anyway. But he is a leftist in the sense that he's just I wouldn't call him a Marxist. That's what I'm trying to get at. I wouldn't call him a communist. I'd call him a shitty leftist. So it's like he has a lot about means of production. And we talked about this earlier. He's got a lot of talk about pro unions, but everything is so confused and muddled in every other way. So he's got sort of a Marxist vague idea of power, how society works is like a pyramid, and that there's someone at the top. And this really is how Marxists like to view society, so that anything that exists within this pyramid serves the person at the top, even if they're against the person at the top. You see what I'm saying? So like anything that, they'll often say this, anything that exists within capitalism strengthens capitalism, even if it is attacking capitalism. That's what they say, which doesn't make much sense, but whatever. So I found that like even with him, like he's got a even vaguer concept of how power works, because he doesn't really know where he stands on corporations even, like, or he's not even anti-government, he's not anti-statist. So, and I'll get to that in a bit, but so in his model, dissidents are always seen as more human. So you kind of see this on the left now. So if you're critiquing power, you are more human than someone who is not critiquing power. Which is to say, like, as long as you're complaining about any sort of power structure, you're keyed in with what humanity is. But that's why if you are just a person who kind of likes the way things are going, you are an enemy to them. And since they can't figure out what their policies are, that could be really anyone at any given time. Which is why he says, like, if you are running a radical press or a radical bookstore, you could be a rich person. As long as you're not the state, you're fine. Because in his mind, only the state can do propaganda. This is what he says in the book. Propaganda as an entity, as a concept, can only be done by the state. So even if you are like a communist revolutionary, if you are running literal Marxist propaganda, it's not propaganda because you do it out of like a little store in the back or something. So this is what he says in the book. So if you start with that, you're like, oh, I see. I kind of get where he's coming from. I don't agree with it, but their contradictions start to make more sense now. Yeah. And one thing he says about private presses, which is funny, I'll get into his broader conspiracy in a second, but he'll make an example like the reason these small indie presses, these, workers' magazines, these pamphleteers aren't more successful and can't reach the public is because advertisers lack interest in them. And the advertisers have it's a conspiracy to, and again, I'm quoting the book. This is what he says. This isn't me dreaming it up. He says advertisers are conspiring to crush communist revolutionaries because they don't want to advertise in them. It doesn't occur to him that no one wants to advertise because these publications fucking suck, right? And this comes down to, this is where I think anarcho-communism this is really what they hold on to, is the idea of the people. The people as a mass. So there's the people in charge, the elites, the oligarchs, as they like to say. Then there's everyone else, the people. So in their minds, their shitty presses are for the people. And then I really think they struggle with the idea that the people could not like it. The people could actually disagree or think their writing is bad or think that it's run by fucking degenerate spurgs. And that, if you're talking like Emma Goldman, the reason people don't like Emma Goldman, the anarchist writer, is because she's a fucking shitty retard. Yeah. It's not just that they haven't had access to the books. And the reason they don't have access is because of advertisers. Let me just say this about advertisers. First of all, this will build to my point, but advertisers don't actually think like Marxists and anarchists or socialists like this. Advertisers, ironically, understand that the people are subdivided into groups. And they do this through either voluntary associations or with ethnic identity. So the irony is advertisers, through the collection of data and through actual research, understand that there is no such thing as the people. There's these well-defined groups. And if you want to appeal to these groups, you need to appeal to them on identity-based things, which is, the Marxists, even though they like to say they're, the front runner on everything, they had to learn this later on, that if you want to talk to black people, you have to talk to black people in a very specific way. You have to use a certain language. You have to have certain representation. You have to talk to certain values. They won't value the same things a white Marxist will. You have to frame it in a specific way for them. You have to, same thing with Asians, same thing with Hispanics, same thing with different classes, if you want to go that way. So that's when he says, there's a conspiracy against our literature. He thinks it's if you just made your literature better, advertisers would advertise in it. But because your presses are bad, it's not that advertisers are against you. And by the way, when they say advertisers, I think this is them incorrectly applying a broad brush to a group of people. So when you're talking about advertisers, you're talking about people who advertise. Sure. So who advertises? There's two big groups. One is advertising agencies, the guys who run the advertising industry, who do a lot of media buying. But then who else advertises is just businesses. Random business, any business, a shoemaker, a restaurant, a doctor, a dentist, a little upstart, another publication, another indie publication. So when you're saying the advertisers are your enemy, you're also saying everyone who owns a business. Because why weren't the unions advertising in your publications? Why don't any other socialist businesses advertise in your publications? Why aren't you getting money from them? Oh, because maybe they don't like your publications, or they don't exist, or they, you see what I'm saying? Like when it looks at who do you think your enemy is, your enemy in this case is actually anyone who owns a business, because they all advertise and they have all collectively decided that paying your independent zine is not going to get them what they want.
Yeah.
So you got to deal with that. So broad stroke here, I'm saying that they incorrectly identify what the social groupings are, which is more than any, and he still does this. Noam Chomsky still does this. And anytime I hear people talk about the people, I got to tune out. That's not how it works. And I see a lot of people on the right doing that. And I think they're doing it for rhetorical purposes. But this is what I made the argument that the normie doesn't exist. There is no normie. And we can joke about it. We can joke about, other people say TV race. First of all, TV race, forced meme, not funny or interesting. Second of all, it doesn't exist. There is no normie. There's no like mainstream guy. We can kind of talk about certain prevailing ideas, but like that personality archetype doesn't exist. The people are actually more subdivided along ethnic identity lines than you think. And your inability to identify that is the reason your movements don't fucking go anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's why in the 21st century, you had to be the last horse across the fucking finish line to figure that out.
It's kind of a silly thing, but it's a lot like Christian music. Like you have, I growing up in the church and having musicians in the family, and it was always kind of a gripe that, our music is so good. Why don't other people listen to it? You'd think that this should be a ministry. This should be an evangelical ministry, that if we make really good music, and then it's Christian music, and that can be a way of spreading the word of Christ is through the music. And it's like, well, I guess it doesn't work because the evil corporations and the anti-Christian nature of the media, they just hate us and they won't spread our stuff. It's like, no, it's because your music's bad. It's awful. It's not good. It's not even remotely nearly as good as even the trashy pop shit. And that's why people don't listen to it. It's not because it's not Christian, or because there is actually music out there that's nominally Christian that does make the charts. It's just that it happens to be good. So it's the same thing with this, I think.
Also, who also hates Christian music? God. I spoke to Jesus and he said you're gay.
And fake. He also says you're fake. Just so you know.
Yeah, there's this show I like, and I don't know if this will out me as being fed or a plant to de-radicalize, but I like the show, The Righteous Gemstones, and it's got John Goodman, I won't go into that, but it's a very much like that. It's a modern mega church, an American mega church, family comedy drama, but it's a lot of that. It's a lot of it's an acoustic guitar. It's like every mass, it's not called a mass because they're not Catholic, but whatever, every thing they do is like a pop concert. It's got a backing band, it's got a laser show and everything. Anyway, but just to speak more on the book. So the central thesis of this book, it's about how manufacturing consent, about how the opinions of the populace are engineered by this central force that even when it is contradicting itself, it's serving its own interests. So to break it down just a bit further, he says, all news passes between 5 gates before it gets to you, the viewer, the people. And these inputs of interest have never been seen to be as from the people. So this is where we get kind of complicated, where it's like, there's these power brokers in society that filter all the information to you, but it's important to never see those as also members of the population. So anyway, the 5 gates that the information go through, the truth goes through, is the problems it deal with is the size, ownership, and profit orientation of these. And that's one. It sounds like 3, but that's the first one. So the first one is the fact that, these news outlets are profit driven. So that's a thing you got to contend with if you want to get the real information. The second is the advertising license to do business. So kind of tied to the first one, you have to have advertisers give you money. And if what you say isn't advertiser friendly, you will get advertisers pulling out and you'll lose your funding, whatever. The third is sourcing news from power brokers. So in this, he's saying that one of the big problems is that journalists, when they want to get to the truth, the people they have to deal with are institutional themselves. You have to speak to, the press secretary. You got to speak to the PR person representing you got to represent whatever business is representing this company. So you're dealing to get the information. You have to go through the filter of the people who might lie to you anyway. Okay, that's one. The fourth one is flack generated by organized organizations. So flack is something that is just critiques. He brings think tanks into this. So a think tank is a private, like an NGO or something, where it's private, but its whole goal is to attack the truth. It's to give out false information, false studies, critiques, and just fog the issue. So that's one thing you have to deal with. So even if it's not coming from the government, it's coming from perhaps government associated organizations. Okay. And then the last one, and I'm not making this up, these are his words, is anti-communism. So what I was trying to get at, and you can read the book, he said the big arc of this book, and I'm really summarizing and paraphrasing, these are his words, that the only reason that communism is not accepted by everyone is that the government stands in its way. And absent the government, absent the power brokers, everyone would naturally be a communist, if not just a very, very left-leaning socialist. This is his true belief. And that it's the fundamental, one of the 5 fundamental laws of the entire media power landscape is that they have to be anti-communist. Why? Why be anti-communist? Because, in his own words, is that communism was just such a brilliant and powerful and traumatizing idea to the powerful elites that they had to squash it because it's so cool and popular.
Wow.
That they built their entire identity about fighting communism. Now, he's an older guy, so he probably has, some light trauma from, McCarthyism, from, the Red Scare, as they say. But as we've covered in covering the history of the KGB and stuff, that a lot of McCarthyism wasn't incorrect, that the communists did, in fact, have networks of spies all throughout the West. Yes. And we've covered many cases where they failed, sometimes failed comedically, humorously, but it was accurate that communism was starting proxy wars. The international Marxism was trying to take over the world. It was a universalizing movement. Now, you can say that liberalism is similarly universalizing. Sure, I agree, but still, that's kind of what the Cold War fucking was.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we're on the side of freedom and democracy, but still, it was universalizing. So, McCarthyism wasn't just because communism was such a cool fucking idea and that we need to gather all our chips toward us. Otherwise, these badasses on motorcycles and cool new ideas will take over. That's what he believes. Because otherwise, there's no other reason in Noam Chomsky's mind why anyone would be anti-communist. It couldn't be that you just disagree with communists, like the communist Marxist indie press thing we just talked about. It couldn't be that people just don't like these bullshit magazines. The people couldn't just think you're wrong, and bad, and correctly recognize that you are openly hostile to everything they represent. Maybe they actually have read Marx. Maybe all these people you claim are ignorant have read Marx and have read Marxist literature that are openly hostile to every single one of their religious and cultural and identity-based beliefs. And maybe the Marxists and communists have made no bones about it. Maybe they are very aware of what Marxists believe and just reject it. No, to Noam Chomsky, it must be a fucking conspiracy. And by the way, and yeah, that's just it. So, and this is where we get to, like, when I see him as just kind of a shitty leftist and not really ideologically driven. That's why I say, okay, I can kind of summarize every one of your points as, okay, you're pro-union and you're anti-landlord. That seems to be it. That seems to be the only practical thing you can do. So, and here's the funny thing about a guy like Noam Chomsky. It's like, okay, so you are about organizing individuals. Yes, that's true. You're pro-union, you're pro-organization, you're pro-people advocating for their rights as a mass to put pressure on something that is similarly big. Yes, that is good. If that group becomes a corporation, it must be destroyed.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So this is what I was talking about at the start, where it's inconceivable to him that these gatekeepers he identifies could also be of the people. That there is such a thing as maybe a journalist doesn't like what you're selling, or maybe is on the side of the truth and the truth doesn't agree with you, or that the people in a corporation or a conglomerate could also he doesn't see those as the people, even though what you want the people to do is essentially behave as one giant corporation. See what I'm saying? So I'm looking at, like, what do you want people to do? Because is it a problem of scale that we talked about? Like, because ideally, if workers' rights, they start their own union, that union gets big enough, you get the teachers' union, you get the police union, the two unions which, I guess by some miraculous coincidence, are the ones that leftists hate the most. Right? The only really successful unions that exist are the ones that leftists just want to destroy. What do you think about the police union? Hate it, right? Okay. Well, so I guess when a union is so successful, it becomes another corporation, which is basically what a union is, right?
Yeah.
But what do you actually fucking want? You know what I mean? Like, it's not actually ideologically driven. And I'm trying not to call Noam Chomsky fucking stupid, but I read this book, and this is a fucking stupid book. And I once I read it, and I look at all these progressives who say, Noam Chomsky sucks now, but this is the manufacturing consent. It's a garbage fucking book. This is like the 7th printing. It's trash. It's actually a dumb book. Not a dumb guy. Very well read. I see him standing in front of libraries, nice bookshelves. But this is a fucking garbage book. It's stupid. And it's difficult for me to imagine that the people who reference this book have actually read this book. Because from the introduction, from the very beginning, he's just saying that, it's the entire media has to be anti-communist because communism's so cool. That's just fucking dumb. It's a dumb thing to believe. And I would believe, if I was reading an old edition, I would say, okay, maybe he's updated. He hasn't updated it. Noam Chomsky has not updated his worldview. The other fucking, who's this faggot? Edward S. Herman. I don't think he's updated. Maybe he's dead. I don't know.
Nice shoes,
but
faggot.
They haven't updated it. And that's why when you look at Noam Chomsky now, and everyone's just clued in, this guy doesn't make any fucking sense. They're like, oh my God, this is the guy who's supposed to be against media manipulation. And all of a sudden he's advocating for the unvaccinated to be excluded from society. Now he's all about trusting governments. I'm like, yes.
When you talk about folks having the freedom to separate if they don't want to abide by these vaccine mandates, what would that look like on a practical level? Does that mean that folks need to just stay home and have like groceries delivered to them? Does it mean like separated communities of folks who are unvaccinated, or just how do you think this would practically play out?
Same way as with people who say that I don't want to accept traffic rules. I suppose there were people who said, it's an attack on my liberty to make me stop at a red light. It's government overreach. We don't want the state to have that power over my private life. Well, such people they should have the decency to remove themselves from the community. If they refuse to do that, then measures have to be taken to safeguard the community from them. Then comes the practical question that you ask, how can we get food to them? Well, that's actually their problem. Of course, if they really become destitute, then yes, you'd have to move in with some measure to secure their survival, just as you do with people in jail, for example.
Because he's fucking wrong about this shit. You can be smart and wrong because he is a pro-status now. Now, if you listen to Noam Chomsky, he's going on shows and all he's talking about how the unvaccinated are spreading misinformation. What is misinformation? Something that the government disagrees with. And he's saying that the government should have marshaled its forces and done stronger lockdowns. And the only thing that stood in their way was the pharmaceuticals. Like this perfect scenario he's envisioning where the government could just steamroll everyone and bring us to whatever fucking fag utopia he's got in his mind was the only people who stood in his way were these other individuals. You see what I'm saying? Like he's a pro-status now.
The drug companies, we have handed over our fate to private tyrannies called corporations, which are unaccountable to the public, in this case, Big Pharma, and for them, making new body creams is more profitable than finding a vaccine that will protect people from total destruction. It would have been possible for the government to step in, going back to wartime mobilization. That's what happened.
Whereas this entire book was anti-statist. And according to him, anyone that's in this system that is anti-state is actually also serving the state because it's allowed to happen. So I guess vaccinations are status. Are you against vaccinations, Chomsky? No, you're fucking not, because you haven't actually thought this through, because you're a fucking communist. You know what? You're not even a communist. You're a fucking gay leftist.
Yeah.
And which means you actually don't know what Marxists say. You just have this idea of, you kind of talk about workers. And that's what we're seeing on the left now. People debating about workers stuff. And they don't even understand what they're arguing. Like, it's just fucking pathetic.
He's a little bit like a leftist Peterson, in the sense that, like, Peterson is a psychologist who has now gotten into politics. And a lot of his takes are at best shallow and at worst totally incoherent. And it's the same with Chomsky, and it always has been. He's just he's a mouthy leftist. He's a linguist, and I'm sure, like you said, everybody says he's a really excellent linguist. In his field, he's well respected. But politics and propaganda is not his field. He doesn't know anything about it. He's just nosy and mouthy. And because he was saying something that people were jiving with, he became famous. And now, it's an emperor has no clothes type situation where you can't say Noam Chomsky is a dope or has a bad take. When not only is his take bad, it's recycled. It's covered in other people's saliva, these fucking takes.
Yeah, well, and also, like, when he talks with the media, because he casts a wide net with the media, he does also implicate the New York Times, Time Magazine. When he says the media, he means everything. So it's not just Fox News. He says they're all... So CNN and Fox News are on the same side. But if you ask them that now, I'm sure he disagreed. And then you might say, well, no, I won't call him Norm. It's Noam Chomsky. No, but Noam Chomsky is like, he says in the book that when asked, what about all these times where America either backed leftist revolutionaries on the rare occasions, or they're vehemently anti-fascist. You can't argue that America is pro-fascist, really. He says that they only do that for, quote, image-enhancing purposes. So again, we're back to the Marxist critique of power, where it's that, here's how they behave. Well, what about when they don't behave that way? Well, that's just to trick you. So, but as long as you're convinced of that core, any contradiction is just part of the conspiracy. So I'm like, well, there's lots of evidence of America, no matter what you feel about America, not behaving this way. But then it's like, oh, that's just, they did that for you. They did that for us. You know what I mean? Like, okay, well, whatever. And it's hard to tell whether or not he's pro or anti-journalist. He might be pro-journalist, but not pro-journalist organization. Because once you're a journalist organization, now you're part of the institution. So he doesn't actually discuss at what level a group becomes institutional. That would be the first thing I would ask. So, like, I'm like Vice. Like Vice started. At what point did Vice become institutional? Was it when it became a corporation, or can you be a certain size and not be a corporation and still have power, even if you're attacking the institution? You see what I'm saying? Like he doesn't explore this. Why would you? Who wants to hear about, it's not a fucking short book. What are we looking at here? It's like, those are notes. Around 350 pages. Like, at no point does he talk about that. He talks a lot about Vietnam for 100 pages, if anyone gives a fuck. Who cares a shit about the Vietnamese? Not even the Vietnamese.
Clearly.
It's just, what are they into? I wanted to say elephants, but that's like Taiwanese or something. What are the Vietnamese known for? Yeah, what are they known for?
Rice?
Like river rafting.
Yeah.
Rice. Triangle hats. Loving long time. You're just like vague Asian stuff.
Loving long time. It's all just film references.
Pokemon.
Yeah, not really anything. Vietnamese are Pokemon.
Gotta catch them all. We tried. But this is another, and this is where you get into spiritual, metaphysical stuff, where he talks about the truth. He mentions the truth. They're trying to fog the truth from you. Well, what is the truth? We don't actually establish what the truth is. Now, on one hand, it's accuracy. I believe in accuracy. I'm not sure I believe in truth, because you talk about truth, you get into philosophical discussions. Like, I used to work as a reporter for around a year when I was younger. In my early 20s, I worked as a reporter. And I like reporters. I like the idea that someone goes on the scene of something that happens. You ask the who, what, where, when, why, how. That's it. And you write it down. You do some interviews. You try and here's an event. Let me describe the event that happened. Here it is. You get that a lot in local newspapers. That's what I did. I was a local reporter. So I would be talking about things that are reasonably small. But I would try and get a 360-degree view of what that issue was, talk to both sides. Boom, here you go. Journalist is about storytelling. So journalist is oftentimes taking the report, some little news story comes across the desk of Frontline or whatever it might be, and they say, oh, there's a story here. There's a story that needs to be told. So journalists have always been on the side of storytelling above truth. So I don't subscribe to this belief that guys like Noam Chomsky believe, where there was a golden age of journalism. If there was a golden age of journalism, it was maybe 5 years. So it was a flash in the pan, debatably even then. I could argue that they were still serving power brokers. They were just the ones you like. Because if I were to ask about, Norm, what are your favorite journalists? Oh, are they going to be communist journalists? Are they? Because that's what he says. He says his critique. He says this in the book. He says that during the Vietnam War, there was obviously journalists and reporters and the entire media infrastructure that were critical of the war in Vietnam, just like they were critical of the war in Iraq, really. He says that's still part of the system because it wasn't critiquing the war in Vietnam enough. He has a whole section on the Vietnam War. So according to Noam Chomsky, and he says this in the book, what they should have done is actually had the Viet Cong on news shows pleading their case. So even when the news is critical of what America is doing, it's still serving it if you don't literally just platform all these people. Now, would he extend that platforming to, vaccine hesitant people? Of course not. Would he extend that to fascists? Of course not.
Mr. Chomsky, over the years, you have been a consistent defender of free speech. But now what we're seeing is an uptick in information control in the name of combating misinformation. We see social media giants deplatforming users that spread misinformation. Most recently, musicians Neil Young and Joni Mitchell boycotted Spotify for its deal with the Joe Rogan podcast, which medical professionals say has spread falsehoods about COVID-19. How do you feel about these efforts to stop misinformation through deplatforming?
I'm generally opposed to it, but we should bear in mind that that's a very minor part of the suppression of free speech. Educational system should not include material which makes children, meaning white children, feel uncomfortable. That's a way of saying we cannot teach the history of the country. We cannot teach the fact that slavery, brutal, vicious slavery, and extermination of the indigenous population was a major part of American history. Not allowed to teach that because it may make white children feel uncomfortable.
What he's the biggest advocate of tamping down misinformation. So according to Noam Chomsky, the only thing, really when you break it down, he just wants you to talk to more Marxists. That's it. Because Marx, as long as you're a Marxist that is anti-American, you are on the side of truth. Yeah. That's as far as he goes into defining who is actually on the side of truth. Because he doesn't define truth in any other way. He doesn't define it as accuracy. I think there is accuracy, then there's truth. We can debate about truth, but he's not really anti-accuracy. He's anti, you didn't explain the motivations of my guys well enough. And that's another thing entirely. But that's journalism. Journalism is storytelling. And he's upset that journalists weren't permitted to plead a case for the Viet Cong in such a way that people liked them. And they weren't sufficiently anti-American, so they were on the side of lies. That's Noam Chomsky.
What a dope.
He also claims that the fucking media would never criticize the CIA. In this book, he says that. That's insane. That is absolutely fucking insane. But according to Noam Chomsky, if you do criticize the CIA, you're actually on the side of the CIA because you didn't criticize them the exact way that I would.
Yeah.
This is a book. This is like 20,000th printing of this book. Progressives across the whole fucking political sphere still look at this like this is, look, Noam Chomsky sucks now, but at least he did manufacturing consent. I wouldn't wipe my ass with this shit. This is bad. It's bad. It's silly. When you read it, it's silly. It sounds like the worst conspiracy theorist you've ever read. This is up there with like Flat Earth, but they teach this in schools. They teach this in Howard Zinn, what was it, fucking People's History of the United States, Guns, Germs, and Steel. It's all the same horse shit. These people are, again, I don't want to call him dumb, but he wrote a very dumb book. And that's why when he's all about locking you up right now, he wants the government to persecute you because the government's in this sense, his dystopian power structure is aligned with the thing he wants to do and sees no contradiction in calling them down upon you. Anyway, that's all I had to say about
fucking
that.
Guy. Yeah, I had no idea. I've heard that reference so many times, so it's good. I guess it's good to know. I haven't read it, so.
It is about, from the part, the Indochina Wars, Vietnam. This is what I was talking about. Here's his critique of the reporting from the war. As the U.S. invasion mounted in scale and intensity, Indochina was flooded with war correspondents, many of whom reported what they saw and heard with honesty and courage. With rare exceptions, however, they gave an account of the war as perceived by the U.S. military on the ground or offered up in press briefings. In the Home Offices, Washington's version prevailed until elite divisions within the United States expanded the range of tactical debate. Reporters often did not conceal atrocities committed by the U.S. military forces, although they did not appear to perceive them as atrocities and surely did not express the horror and outrage that would have been manifest if others were the perpetrators. So here he's saying, like, yes, okay, the journalists covered American war crimes, war atrocities. They covered them. But, they weren't as outraged as they normally would be. So you're not actually saying they weren't on the side of truth. They weren't on the side of your level of moral outrage. Anyway, that's just what I'm saying. So when I see, back to the Ukraine thing, when I see people talk about propaganda, when they talk about human interest stories, when they talk about the quality of the outrage propaganda, I just don't do it. Every side has it wrong. Every side's stupid. All their propaganda sucks. I don't want to hear human interest stories. I don't want to hear emotionally evocative anything.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.